Hi, my name is Gudrun from GE Designs, and in this video, I'd love to give you some tips on using the Stripology rulers. If you are new to the Stripology rulers, let's take a look at what they look like. This is the XL ruler, the largest one. And what the difference is between these rulers and regular rulers, it has slits every ½ inches. So when you're cutting, you place your rotary cutter in the slit and it guides your cuts, which makes you much more accurate, efficient, and it's a great time saver for cutting out anything you need to cut for quilting. Let's start with the basics. What kind of cutter can you use with the rulers? You can use any kind of cutter that is at least 45mm blade or a 60mm blade. Nothing smaller than a 45mm, just because the blade needs to reach through the slits, through your fabric, down to your cutting mat. So we're not cutting on the edge of a ruler, we're cutting straight through the ruler. So what type of cutter is all based on your preferences. These straight handle cutters that have a blade guard that you can pull back, so the widest part of your blade here is at the top. They work very well. I do recommend a cutter that you can manually pull that blade cover back, not the ones that you have to push down to get the blade out. That will not treat your ruler very well, and you can start chipping away at it. So any type of cutter where you can pull the blade guard back. It can be a cutter where the blade goes to the either side. All of those work well. You can also do a ergonomic cutter. So these work, you pull that blade guard back and it exposes your blade this way. So the only difference is when we're cutting with this type of cutter or that type of cutter, when we're cutting through a ruler, is that we need to make note of where the biggest part of our blade is. And that will determine the angle that you need to cut through when you're cutting with the rulers. And we'll go into that a little bit later once we start cutting fabric. So when we cut with the XL ruler, you can cut full width fabric by folding it into fourths. So what we have here is a piece of fabric that is selvage to selvage. So the selvages are here together on one side. I made sure to fold it so that they are pretty even. And then you have your bolt fold here. So when we are folding our fabric, we want to make sure when we fold it that the bolt fold and now a second fold that we create down here are perfectly parallel in order for our strips to be straight. And I want to show you just a little trick. I like to use the lines on my cutting mat to take my bolt fold and align that bolt fold with one of the lines on my cutting mat. And then I bring my selvages up and over and not past that fold. But what I'm looking for is another line on my cutting mat that I can use to align this second fold with, so that I know both folds are aligned with a line, so they are pretty even and perpendicular to each other. And then I like to flip this over so I can easily see here the top fold and now another bottom fold here. Then I take my ruler and I want to use a horizontal line on my ruler. So there are white and black lines. I like to use the black lines when I'm working with lighter fabric. So I will use this 1-inch line to align with this fold here on the bottom. And then I can double check to see up top and see if my top fold is parallel. It is just lined up with this 12-inch line. So I am good to go here. You can use the white line if you're working with darker fabrics. So the other thing that I do before I start cutting my strips is make sure that all of my raw edges of the fabric are to the left of that zero slit. We always start by cutting through the zero to clean off our edge, and that also marks that first cut. And then we can cut any kind of increment that you need in ½ inches. There's even a way to cut quarter-inch increments with the Stripology XL or the squared rulers. So when you are cutting, what you want to do for that first cut, we have everything aligned and you have your pattern ready. It's going to tell you the widths of strips that you need. When we cut, we want to make sure we place that blade into that teardrop here on the bottom. So in order to do that, I like to lay my cutter a little bit on the side to make sure it drops into the teardrop. Now, before you start pushing or putting any kind of pressure, we want to make sure that you straighten out your cutter so it's perfectly parallel to the cutting mat. So then as we are getting ready to cut, if you're right-handed, you want to just put 2 fingers right on that first lip here. We don't want to put our hand over here, only here if you're right-handed. If you're left-handed, you can hold it like this. The beautiful thing with the rulers is that you can be left-handed or right-handed because we are just moving our cutter down the ruler. We're not moving the ruler. The grip on the back of it will hold everything in place, so there's no need to put any kind of extra pressure. So just 2 fingers here as we make our first cut through that slit. So one of the things I wanted to point out too, if you're cutting 2.5-inch increments, which are very popular increments, there are black squares every 2.5 inches, helping you with that math, so you can just find those black squares if you're cutting 2.5-inch strips. Same thing with 1.5, we have little stars every 1.5 inches, just to help you with that math. So as we start cutting, I will just lay my cutter on the side, drop it in the teardrop, and once I know it is in there and perfectly straight, I can make my cuts. And as I'm cutting, I'm also listening to that sound, because if I don't hear my cutter cutting through, there might be a reason for that, as it's not reaching through the fabric. Most times the reason is, as we push forward with our cutter, naturally our angle, our arm will drop. So what is happening as our angle changes is that we're losing part of our blade. So the blade is not reaching through the fabric anymore. So when we're cutting, we hear that and it's not going to reach through. So our strips are sticking together. So one good rule is to start with your cutter at an angle and then push all the way through, keeping that same angle through the cut. So you also want to check your cutter. So if you have these straight cutters, you know that the widest part of your blade is going to be right at the top. But if you have an ergonomic cutter, the widest part of your blade is going to be right here at the bottom when your arm is at this angle. So this way we want to make sure we keep that angle all the way through. Another thing to check is if you have a 45mm blade, I recommend cutting 4 layers of fabric at the maximum, possibly 6, but no more than that, because that blade is just not going to reach all the way through. If you have a 60mm cutter, any kind of a 60mm blade, you will see that the clearance of the blade is a lot larger, so you can cut more layers of fabric. So for example, I would recommend up to 8 layers of fabric or 10 layers. The only thing to keep in mind when you have a lot of layers like that is that the fabric can start to move on itself. The ruler will not move on the fabric, but the fabric can start moving on itself. So as we cut our strips according to our pattern, once you have all your strips cut, and then your pattern tells you to subcut those strips into squares or rectangles. You can do that very easily and save a lot of time as you do that. So I take my strips, I will open them up so that I have my selvages all on the same side. I like to use the lines on my cutting mat to just line up my fabrics, and I can stack up stacks of strips to cut at the same time. And I can do multiple stacks of strips. So can you imagine if you're cutting 400 2.5-inch squares for a pattern, you're going to have a lot of time-saving tendency by cutting them all at the same time. So now that I have my strips all lined up, I can now bring my ruler over, and what I want to do is use the horizontal lines on my ruler to make sure that all those strips are looking nice and straight. If they are not, I can adjust so they are all lined up with a line on my ruler. And so once they are all lined up and straight, I know I'm ready to cut for whatever increment I need to cut at. So for example, let's say I need to cut a 3-inch increment here, so a 2.5 by 3-inch strips. I will start by going through the 0 just as before and cutting through all of those layers. And then I'm just going to cut in 3-inch increments. And a good thing to know with this ruler, even though we have slits going to 20 inches, the edge of the ruler is going to give you an extra inch. So the last slit is 20, but this lip here, the edge of the ruler, is exactly an inch. So if we cut on the edge of the ruler here, that is going to be my 21. So I could use that if you're cutting in increments of 21. So same thing with this edge here. This is exactly an inch. So you have a ruler that is 22 inches from edge to edge. So as we cut all our strips, what you will notice is that you have all these rectangles cut in no time. The best part is they're all exactly the same size, which is because we're cutting through the ruler and not moving it, versus cutting with regular rulers while we're measuring and moving every single time. Now the XL ruler, of course, has a lot of features that go beyond cutting strips and rectangles. You can cut your strips into diamonds and triangles using the diagonal lines, both 60-degree and 45-degree. You can square up blocks using the lines here on the side and the other side. And so there are lots of features here that you can use, trimming blocks. So I would encourage you to go ahead and watch the video specifically for the XL ruler to see some of those features and learn about them. Now, the other rulers that are available is the squared ruler, which has a lot of the same features as the XL. It's just smaller, so nicer to travel with and take along. It is great for squaring up a lot of blocks, so trimming a lot of blocks. I like to use this one because it's more maneuverable. It has slits every ½ inch, just like the XL, so you can still cut your yardage and subcut. The Stripology squared mini ruler is a smaller version of the squared. I love this one from when I'm working with smaller blocks, for trimming block parts, half square triangles and such. And then we have the fourth one, which is the Stripology quarters mini. This is the only ruler that has 1/4 inch increments, and so it is specifically great to use for cutting anything in 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch, and then for squaring up blocks that have a 1/4 inch increments. So check out some of the other videos describing all the features of the rest of these rulers, and I hope you enjoy using them.